Hi, this post is about coding standards in WordPress. Now, we're going to be doing a few deep dives into advanced WordPress development in future posts. So I thought maybe it would be a good idea to first start talking about how we're going to write code in the first place. So let's start by looking at what WordPress has to say about its own coding standards. So what are coding standards and why do you need them in the first place? According to the official WordPress documentation, it's nothing but a baseline for collaborations, right? So coding standards, according to this page, help avoid common coding errors, improve readability of code, and simplify modification. They ensure that files within the project appear as they were created by a single person. In other words, coding standards come under project governance. Now, since you can write code in any way you like, coding standards allow different developers with different code styles and opinions to accept some sort of like a baseline, willingly or unwillingly, in order to contribute to the project. If there's one set of people who have a lot of opinions about a particular subject, developers would be very high on that list. So somebody has to decide what the coding standards of a particular project are. Now, that could, if it's an open source project, is generally the people who started that project, either by themselves or with discussion with other folks or in the involvement of the community, or it could just be leadership at your at company who set the coding standards, when they started doing what they were doing. Now, it's an important thing to understand the history of the WordPress coding standards so that we can, whatever we're doing next, we do in an informed way. Now, what do I mean by this? I hope it gets clear towards the end of this video. Let's start off by first seeing when the WordPress coding standards were implemented in the first place. So I'm looking at the WordPress coding standards Git repository. Now, if I go back in time, what we can see is the first commit on this repository happened around between April and June of 2011. So what that means is, if the first commits happened around 2011, surely conversations for a coding standard happened before that, right? So for those of us who are new to WordPress, WordPress is a very old project. It came into existence at a time where PHP itself was kind of finding its feet, right? There were a lot of things, for example, exceptions that were not even part of the PHP standard at the time of creating WordPress, and we'll get to that in a future post. But as you can see here, the WordPress coding standards were kind of formalized sometime in 2011. Now, even though they were formalized in 2011, the automated tools to actually detect them and maybe even fix them didn't come until much later, like a few years later. But in any case, people were following the coding standards and manually checking them in core WordPress. Now, obviously, the adoption in the community, for example, plugin developers, even today is probably not high. But if you want to, for example, if you want to put your plugin on the official WordPress plugin repository, you'll kind of have to follow these WordPress coding standards. Now, why am I bringing this up? Because shortly after the WordPress coding standards were officially adopted, the PHP a standards recommendation, or the PSR coding standards were officially adopted, and this was in If I go back in time, the PSR one coding standards were adopted in 2012. So just shortly after, I would say unfortunately, shortly after the WordPress coding standards were officially adopted. Now, for those of you who know, the PSR coding standards are very, very different from the WordPress coding standards. Now, I don't know, if had the PSR one coding standards been released before the WordPress coding standards, would that have had some impact on it or not? Because the WordPress coding standards emphasizes readability. Now, again, all of this is very subjective, right? Now, I've worked with many teams where, let's say, a new person or a junior engineer comes on board and says, "Hey, I actually find it easier to follow PSR rather than the WordPress coding standards." Especially, there's a lot of emphasis on inline documentation and stuff inside of the WordPress coding standards. In any case, so WordPress basically just missed the boat in making the PSR1 coding standards. Now, we as PHP developers now have a choice, right? Now the choice is, of course, if you're contributing to WordPress code, you don't have a choice because you have to follow the WordPress coding standards. But if you're working on WordPress in your own project and in your own plugin, that's not going to be on the the WordPress.org plugin repository. You actually do have a choice to follow the coding standard of your choice. Now, because the coding standards are so wildly different from each other, my personal opinion is that we should still follow the WordPress coding standards, but maybe exclude certain things from it that are that may conflict with the PSR coding standards. Now, I'll get to that towards the end of this post. Now, within the PHP community, Laravel is the big player, and big shout out to Laravel. I think what Laravel is doing really kind of trickles down to all projects that work with PHP, and WordPress itself has had a lot of influence from Laravel, and I would say the other way around as well. In any case, so Laravel has its own coding standards, which are a subset of the PSR 12 coding standards. Now, they have a tool called Laravel Pint or Pint. I think it's Pint, but I'm going to say Pint. What I love about Pint or Pint is that it works out of the box. And you don't have to worry about writing code according to the Laravel coding standards, because it's just going to fix everything for you automatically. Now, we want something like that for the WordPress community, right? So I was actually I'm very passionate about this subject. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and created the WordPress coding standards for the PHP, PHP WordPress coding standards, which will be compatible with a fixer. I'll come back to the fixer. So it's actually very simple. So if I go into the actual rule set, what you'll see is it's actually the WordPress coding standards with just a few handful of exclusions, right? For example, the short array syntax, the file names with a hyphenated lowercase. This is for autoloading, right? So autoloading, in my opinion, is absolutely essential in the PHP world. It's an absolute game changer, and unfortunately, WordPress is very, very behind on that front. So definitely something, if you're working on a modern, I hate to use the word modern, but if you're working on a newer code base, you should absolutely be considering using classes in your code. Again, we'll get to that in a future post, but if you're using classes in your code, then if you're not using autoloading, then it's going to be a big pain. Similar. So in order to work with classes and autoloading and whatnot, it was necessary to remove these rules just to kind of make it compatible with that. So what I'm trying to achieve here is some sort of middle ground where you're using the WordPress coding standards, but we're able to bring in, and again, I hate to use the word modern, but modern practices, modern PHP practices into WordPress development. Now, this is just a primer post to what is going to come in terms of the fixer in the next video. I'll give you a sneak peek right now, but the fixer and also how this coding standard is a foundation for enterprise level engineering, and why it's important to have this coding standard and not the official WordPress coding standard. So this is the thing that I've been alluding to in this video, which is the PHP/CS fixer for WordPress. I'm going to make a totally different post to talk about this in more detail, but essentially this package and this package are meant to work together. You can, of course, use them independently as you see fit, but they work very well together. So in other words, we'll also probably talk about the coding standards and the relevance of coding standards in the age of AI, since AI is writing a lot of our code today. Now, for some reason, and I think I know the reason. So a lot of PHP code that the LLMs are trained on either follow the WordPress way of doing things, or they follow Laravel way of doing things. And the kind of code that the LLMs generate is kind of like a mixture of different approaches and different coding standards and different best practices. Unless, of course, you have some sort of skill that you've added onto your LLMs, or some rules and whatnot. But by default, the LLMs, they kind of generate code that is a little sloppy. So what we want to do is we want to go from that AI generated code into production code fast, right? Now, once the AI generates the code, you don't want to go in and manually change everything to fit the WordPress coding standards, right? You just want like a magic wand, which you can just wave and say, hey, convert this AI generated code into the WordPress coding standards. And that's literally what this does. It actually works like magic if you've not used PHP/CS fixer before. And I'll also elaborate why PHP/CS fixer in that post. But this really is a big time saver. So, gone are the days where you need to align your arrows or, put spaces within parentheses and so on. Everything is just done for you automatically, and it really works like magic. So I'm very excited to show you that post as well. So, hopefully soon. So that about covers this post. Thank you so much for watching.